Hello, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Vince Greco, and I am the Assistant Vice President of Strategic Partnerships for the Association of Graduates and the Air Force Academy Foundation. I want to begin by thanking you all for being a Sabre Society member. Your support of the U.S. Air Force Academy bolsters many programs that complement each of the Academy's mission elements. You play an important role in developing warfighters, leaders of character and quality, and critical thinkers. My guest today is Dan Schnepf, USAFA class of 1983. He is the founder of Matrix Design Group, where he is currently serving as the chairman of the board. Dan is also one of the visionaries behind the TrueNorth Commons development, which is transforming the Academy's North Gate. Welcome to the Sabre Society podcast, Dan, and thanks for being here today.
Hey, thanks, Vince. I really appreciate what you do and what your team does for the Long Blue Line. I've listened to quite a few podcasts, and I think they're both informative and most of the time quite inspiring. So I appreciate the opportunity today.
Appreciation is all ours. When they asked me to host this and I knew who the guest was, I couldn't volunteer fast enough. Dan, you and I are similar in age, and I want you to think back to 1978-ish. You're probably a senior in high school. How in the world, there are no cell phones, there's no computer. How in the world did you learn about the Air Force Academy, and what drew you to wanting to be a member of that Long Blue Line?
You know, I'd be remiss if I didn't say I was as confused and as dazed as many of the high school students as they're going through whatever their curriculum is. You know, I happen to have a modicum of success in academics and athletics. I always wanted to be a leader, and I did some things at school that were leadership-oriented as well. But the real hook for me was when I was growing up on Long Island. My dad, when I was really young, brought me to MacArthur Field and took me up in a Cessna aircraft.
Wow.
And I got to joystick a little bit. And that experience alone said, hey, if I can ever get to a place where I would be able to fly, I'd like to do that. So with my guidance counselor, I started looking through different opportunities that matched my skill sets, my academics, my athletics, and lo and behold, all of the academies popped up as being good choices. I had other options, but I pursued wholeheartedly the Air Force Academy for a number of reasons, and mostly the flight idea, and then, of course, the amazing and majestic campus.
So I have a daughter who graduated here in 2017, and I, through her, learned of some of the happiest times of her life, and then there were some times that she wishes that she wasn't on campus. Can you reflect on some of the most impactful times that you had here during your 4 years at USAFA?
Yeah, I can take you back to the first day I stepped on campus, and I remember getting a little bit of indoctrination. I know it's a little different today than it was back then, and I guess everybody who comes on your podcast might say that, depending on their class, and we accept what's new and go forward. But when I was here, I had a gentleman who I won't mention by name. He did happen to cross-train from the Air Force into the Navy when he graduated, but he told me that his job in life, he was a junior at the time, was to ensure that I did not graduate. And
Wow.
yeah, he was that guy. But you know, the great thing about that is that when you have somebody who's going to push you to your limits, you're going to be a better person for it. And I think that was one of the more impactful experiences. I said, look, if this guy's going to be riding me for my entire career here at the Air Force Academy, I'm going to be better for it. You know, that was an interesting first start. Then I'll turn to another experience that I found to be impactful and very kind of depressing a little bit. You may know that I was an intercollegiate wrestler on the wrestling team, and our coach was a phenomenal coach. He passed a few years ago, Wayne Bachman, but he was a real hard driver. And so in practice, we often would do things that were a lot more aggressive in nature and kind of reflected what we would do on the mat in a match. And one day I was wrestling with another cadet, and I ended up actually hurting myself pretty badly. I ended up breaking my neck. I ended up going to the Air Force Academy hospital and then down to Brooks Medical Center to get evaluated. You talk about low points in your life. At that point, I thought, here I've committed. I'm a sophomore at the Air Force Academy. I'm looking forward to a great career. I want to fly airplanes. And I ended up in the medical condition, which may either get me out of the academy or prevent me from flying. And lo and behold, through the great work of so many good leaders, officers, and cadets alike, I got supported well enough that I did not get a medical disqualification. I ended up getting healed and coming back. I actually even came back to the wrestling team, but ultimately,
Wow.
I was not able to fly. And so, the long and the short of it is that was a harrowing experience. The last one I'll tell you about kind of reflects something that's coming back to our academy, which I'm very excited about. The SERE program, Survival,
Hmm.
Evasion, Resistance, and Escape. I know that the resistance and escape component are really important. And that, when I was a cadet, I was able to be the commander of the compound right here at the Air Force Academy. And it was instructive because when I was going through it, I ended up escaping from the compound 3 times. And the repatriation process and being brought back into that community of people who were all helping us to do better and to experience what it would be like to be captured and then have to resist was absolutely invaluable. So that experience was pretty critical to the idea that you can do anything when you have a great team behind you and you work in unison toward the same goal. And that's kind of what I got out of SERE. A lot of hard work, a lot of harrowing experiences, and in the long run, a lot of growth.
Well, I appreciate you sharing those stories. I tell people that I have the best job in America. I get to do these podcasts and talk to individuals like yourself to hear these stories. And I do a lot of this on the East Coast. So thanks for sharing it. I know it's those 4 years are a tough 4 years, but they really mold you to be that person that you turned out to be. And with that said, you graduated in '83. What happened then? What did you do in the Air Force, and what led you to where you are today as running one of the bigger design groups in the country?
Thanks, Vince. I look back at my cadet experience, and as I just elaborated, I was now going to have to focus on something that was related to engineering. And I was fortunate enough to be brought up in a family where my dad had an engineering company for about 35 years back on Long Island. And as I grew up, even as young as 10 years of age, I would go out in the field on field crews and constructing things. And then I'd be in the office working with engineers who were far obviously more intelligent than I was in that career field. But it made me turn to engineering and structures in specific. And I still remember one of the inspiring leaders at the academy, who's still a dear friend, was Stan Rader. He was a captain at the time teaching me structures. And what an inspiration he was, because he was not a rated officer either. And he told me that the career you could have in the Air Force is not limited because of your inability to be rated as an officer. And it was great. And I ended up going through the engineering program under General Swint, who was also a great mentor. I actually ended up teaching in civil engineering at the Air Force Academy in 1990 through 93 under General Swint. And when I was a
Wow.
cadet, he was also there. So just a tremendous opportunity to do engineering. So when I got into the Air Force, my first assignment was at March Air Force Base in Southern California, and I was assigned as the Air Force airfield engineer. From that position, I was able to start to express and use some of the talents that I had learned in my education, but I was absolutely a far cry from being a finished product. And so I leaned heavily on other experts in the arena. Back when I was in the Air Force officers, we had 27 active duty officers, captains, majors, lieutenants, who are actually doing design work, which is different than what you see today in our Air Force. Today, it's a lot more of the
Hmm.
management function, and back then it was design. So one of the more impactful things that happened to me was I was in 15th Air Force. I was in Strategic Air Command, and I was working under the actual leader was General James E. Light, 3-star general, head of 15th Air Force. He put out a request to all of the bases in 15th Air Force, all the engineers, to try and help him solve a problem with their aircraft, the refueling aircraft, the KC-10. He was trying to employ the KC-10 as not just a refueler, but he also wanted to get it employed as a cargo aircraft and reduce the cost to the Air Force of trailing our refueling groups with C-141s and landing them in austere places. So I wrote an abstract with another great friend of mine and a cadet or a graduate at the time, Rich Lawrence, and it was about designing a loader for the KC-10 aircraft. Lo and behold, we got selected. I interviewed with General Light, and I was able to be taken out of active duty in terms of my position at March. I was put on a 2-year TDY to design and develop and work through the SPO and Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, this light loader. To make a long story short, it was a tremendous success. It ended up saving the Air Force some $350 million a copy for the retrofits that would have to happen to the KC-10 by McDonnell Douglas aircraft. And in the long run, it was a tremendous success. So ended up getting an Air Force award for that, an engineering award under the Theodore von Karman platform back with the Air Force Association in 1991. So that was really great. It ended up being instructive again for what I wanted to do. General Light opened up the doors and now enabled me to get a master's degree in structural engineering, and I ended up coming back and teaching at the Air Force Academy, where I really wanted to work on helping cadets achieve their goals and also become the greatest that they could be. So came back to the Academy and taught. I ended up leaving the Air Force because I was in the Air Force during the first Bush administration, and there was a real push on a voluntary reduction in force. And came back to what I could do outside versus what I could do to help inside. And I ended up taking one of those early out programs, stayed in the reserves, but ended up getting out after 10 years of service, active duty.
Well, thank you for that service. And we talk an awful lot about philanthropy, right? And how, Dan, you encompass all pieces of that pie. I look at that pie as sometimes philanthropy means you come back to the school and you teach, or you come back and you talk to your squadron. Others do it financially with gifts to the academy or their time to the academy. You've encompassed pretty much all of that. So again, thank you for your service for doing that, which leads to the next segment or the next question. If a grad or a parent or a corporation hasn't been on campus recently, the landscape certainly has changed. With the East Club, with the Madeira Cyber Center, Polaris Hall, which you were instrumental in. But let's talk about TrueNorth Commons. This was a vision you had a long time ago. You had to jump through a lot of hoops, but right now, the Hotel Polaris 375-room hotel is open for business. It is short of spectacular, second biggest hotel in Colorado Springs behind the Broadmoor. We soon will have the Hosmer Visitor Center open in a year or so, maybe less. Where did that vision come from? And how did that come to fruition with you and all the hurdles and red tape that were involved in getting that thing across the finish line?
Well, thanks, Vince. Yeah, that was a very tough one, maybe the biggest challenge of my entire career. It takes a lot of people pulling in the same direction to make anything happen. So to sit here and say I was solely responsible for it is a bit of a misstatement. I think without the support of many, many others, we wouldn't have TrueNorth Commons the way it is moving today. The original project was the inspiration of, in my mind, in 2012, of General Gould, Mike Gould. Interestingly enough, when I was a cadet, he was my golf coach. Probably his biggest failure in life is being my golf coach. But at any rate, he was also our associate AOC. He was a captain at the time, and developed a little bit of a relationship back then with him. For him to come back as the 18th superintendent and to push hard after 9/11 had happened, and we had all of that restrictions on getting on different installations based on security, it reduced visitorship at the Air Force Academy from close to 1 million visitors per year, probably 600,000-700,000 of those visiting the visitor center itself, to about 250,000 in 2017. The impetus for this project was really driven by his inspiration, working with me and a gentleman from the city of Colorado Springs, Steve Schuck, who is a developer in his own right, was also a gubernatorial candidate in the 80s. They got together, we met, and talked about how we could use Air Force tools to get this done, and to use the newly minted Regional Tourism Act to provide some funding to get this visitor center outside the gate. So the real inspiration was that in 2012, and the history of the project from then till now is pretty storied and very long, and there's a lot of different pieces to it. It first came out as an opportunity in 2015 through AFCEC in San Antonio, and they were asking for developers of interest to come and propose on. They made this 40 or 51 acres of property available for development to see if they could use a unique structure called an enhanced use lease, which is in the
Mm-hmm.
federal acquisition regulation. That enhanced use lease process it's basically a barter program where the developer gives the Air Force, Army, or Navy something that they need in exchange for something of equal value. It's not always financial. It can be like it was in this case, the visitor center. And then the developer is left with the residual value to actually provide some return on that investment. The first proposal didn't work because they did not allow for public finance to be incorporated into the proposal. So I went down to AFCEC, and after I turned in a letter of declination, I did a design I thought was going to be tremendous. Turned in this letter of declination because I thought maybe if they hear what I think can happen and how we might be able to get this financed, it could go forward. As it turned out, of the 7 proposers, none of them proposed and said that they could do the project under its current economic conditions. And so
Right.
I went down there, met with the AFCEC folks, told them how public finance could enhance the project, and asked them if they might consider putting in the next request for proposal. The next EUL came out in the next year. It was included in there. We went after the project full bore. We ended up using public finance and ended up having the funds that we needed to produce TrueNorth Commons, which is obviously a quadrangle of development with the anchor being our visitor center. And then, of course, the hotel being very important to our academy as well. And then there'll be a retail center and another use currently planned as an office with a skiff in the 4th quadrant.
And that was part of my next question. So we have the visitor center, the shell is there. We've got the Hotel Polaris, which is open, which we could talk at length about. But you also envision retail, as our office complex. What else do you think will be in there within the next couple of years?
It's a planned unit development that I ended up getting approved through the city of Colorado Springs. So it allows for a broad swath of uses, but most of those uses are commercial in nature. It does not allow for residential use, and that might be a good thing, although I think one of the better uses could be an assisted living facility for graduates and Air Force folks on the site, and we may try and re-explore that idea as we go forward with the difficulties that are happening right now in the office market. But yeah, the overall objective was 30,000 square feet of retail, and there are several interested retailers in Colorado Springs who want to be a part of this project. And we're working through letters of intent right now, Vince, which so I'm not at leisure to talk about what the company names are,
Sure.
but you should think through everything from personal services like salons to food services to restaurants to retail opportunities. That's kind of what will be out there in the retail section. It's a maximum of 30,000 square feet. We also have some gas stations and C-stores interested in that site.
I guess this is just for my personal observations, if you will. You talked about putting this together around 2012. Did you have any idea back in 2012 the synergy that is taking place inside the North Gate, outside the North Gate? Because back in 2012, there was not an amphitheater. There was not Topgolf. There was not any of that stuff that you see there today. Were you that kind of visionary too, knowing that North Gate was going to explode the way it has?
I think that anybody would say they knew it was going to happen the way it happened is probably not being honest. I saw the North Gate growing. I knew Gary Erickson and what his plans were. I knew the economy was starting to percolate and come around. I knew that the North Gate project could be absolutely a success, especially given the iconic nature of our Air Force Academy, especially given how long it's been an institution and how long it'll be an institution in the future, and how we could provide complementary uses at the North Gate and really bring the Air Force Academy's front door from way inside the academy, which was hard to access, out to the North Gate and beyond the security perimeter, which really gives anybody access to that opportunity. So yes, we did have a vision. We did think that this could come around and create great value, both to our academy, to our community, and to the state of Colorado.
When you had that Sabre and you cut that ribbon at Hotel Polaris, was there just, what was the sense going through you at that time? Relief, exuberation. Finally, there were just big smiles all around.
Yeah, I was exuberant for a whole host of reasons. I put my family and a lot of my friends through a lot getting this program pulled together and to the point that it was at. And pride was extremely high. I mean, I think I mentioned that I met my hotel developer partner, back in 2019 in August. And when I heard that he had a platform, a 501c3 platform that would enable us to not only build this tremendous facility and put it in play, but then to take ownership of it and to donate it back to our Air Force Academy Foundation and AOG, they had me locked and loaded then. I said, this is exactly what we need to do. As you know, we've done a lot. I'm on the Air Force Academy Foundation board. We do a lot to try and get donors to support and provide the sizzle on the steak for our
Right.
Air Force Academy. And this is just a great way to do that. Once that hotel gets paid off, the bonds are done, it'll go over to our foundation and our AOG, and we will be able to generate revenue on an annual basis that is unheard of and unseen at this point. I'll just give you an example. In 2018, when the model was first done for the hotel, the financial model, it was built up that the hotel would be about a $35 million annual operating budget. And of that budget, they anticipated that somewhere around $10 to $12 million would be net operating profit. And if you know about what a 501c3 does, they have to balance their books annually, zero them out, and they have to meet their charter. Well, the charter for Provident Resources is to help government with difficult development projects. It is not to run and operate hotels and own hotels. So when the bonds are paid off, that net operating profit will accrue to our academy in perpetuity. The numbers I just read to you were 2018 numbers, and obviously as
Right.
inflation occurs, they grow. But to be able to put together a program that's going to generate that kind of revenue based on the success of the hotel annually is just, that was just the greatest thing in my mind that we could possibly do. And we're on the cusp of making that happen. The bonds will take, a maximum of 30 years to retire. Those are 501c3 bonds. However, based on contributions by people who want to help our hotel and also help our academy, we could retire those bonds in a much quicker fashion. In fact, it wouldn't be unreasonable to retire the bonds in 10 years. Under that scenario, based on the performance of the hotel, from the 10-year point on, the bondholders would be released and the project would then accrue and inure to our Air Force Academy.
Wow. Dan, we've talked a lot about the successes of this project and Hotel Polaris, but I think what our grad community and anybody else watching this podcast needs to understand, the financing almost didn't happen. In 2020, when COVID ravaged this country, the bond market basically tanked, putting this project in real jeopardy.
Yes, it did, Vince. And I'll tell the story. This might be the biggest miracle and blessing that happened in this travesty of things. On March 11th of 2020, we had sold $1 billion of bonds to 18 different bond houses. I had gone to Wall Street, I went to Boston, I went to Philadelphia, and told the story of this amazing project. And I convinced these bond buyers that this was something they wanted to participate in. So we had 18 bond houses buying $1 billion of bonds to finance about $322 million of projects here. And on the 12th, a day later after we were supposed to close, the bond market collapsed due to COVID. And the S&P and others in the government had decided that that was an act of God and that they were able to allow the bond buyers to retract their interest and their purchase orders of these bonds. It was probably one of the first times that that has happened in the history of the bond market. The bond market is driven by something called the MMD. It's much like the Standard & Poor. It's a barometer of interest rates and what you can do and sell at. So there we were stuck. I decided that I would pursue the CARES Act under Secretary Mnuchin. And we found a unique clause in the CARES Act that looked like it would work. It was designed to provide economic input and create jobs. And so I pursued it with vigor. I got 4 different senators to write letters of support. I had the local congressmen writing letters of support and a lot of people in the federal government supporting the project. We got all the way to the end of that process. Took about half a year to get through it. And I ended up being on a conference call with Secretary Mnuchin and his team, his staff. And I didn't know he was really on the call at the time. But we went through this, and I was lamenting how this clause looked like it was identical to what we were trying to get done, and how could we get the funding? Well, he piped in and said, Dan, that was not the intent when we wrote that clause. The intent was to create jobs. And if I were to approve a project like this, we would eliminate all the ability to fund people who are losing their jobs because of COVID, and we'd be funding development projects across the nation. So unfortunately, we're not going to be able to use that. Well, lo and behold, the bond market had been collapsing, and now bond requirements were much higher in interest rate than we were proposing, than we had sold, and we thought we'd never get back there. In January, I get a call from John Mullenberg, who is our underwriter with Royal Bank of Canada, and he said, Dan, you won't believe this, but we've got some bond buyers who are ready to purchase your bonds. It was the last week of January in 2022. I said, let's go. So we reinitiated all the purchase orders. We went back to the 18 bond buyers that had departed us after the collapse of the economy, and 15 of the 18 agreed to buy these bonds. During the first week it takes a week to close these things, the bond market went up the MMD went up by 25 basis points. Each one of those bond buyers had the right, but not the obligation, to ask for that 25 basis points. If any of them had done that, it would have collapsed our project, because we needed all the funds to build and develop the infrastructure in the visitor center. We closed on February 2nd, and the next week, that very same week, the bond market went up another 85 basis points. So 1.2% over the closing period, and the bond market had never been back to those interest rates again. So if you want to talk about what saved the project and created the value that we needed to get it done, it was this miracle that happened in the end of January 2022 and the early February 2022.
Well, and this is a great opportunity for me to do my other job. And you're right, Dan. As fundraisers for the foundation and the association, our team is out. I travel to the Northeast. So we have people down in Texas. For those of you watching and listening, to pay down those bonds at a quicker or faster rate, there are naming opportunities within the hotel. You could have your name on one of the rooms. There's 375 rooms, a conference center. Or if you really have the means, or you win Powerball for a $10 million price tag, we'll put your name on the hotel, to drive down those bonds. If that were to happen quickly, I mean, you just said maximum of 30 years, but if we can get corporations and grads and friends of the academy to participate, what would be the earliest we could pay down those bonds, in your opinion?
Well, the only thing I can do is give you an experience on another project. I worked on the Lowry project up in Denver, where we redeveloped what used to be Lowry Air Force Base into a thriving community, working closely with Tom Markham, another graduate and a tremendous guy and a great mentor. We had let somewhere in the neighborhood of $35 million of infrastructure bonds up there. And based on the success of the development, they were 30-year bonds. They were paid off in 7.5 years. Now, that was also during the highest economic upturn in our economy, probably since just after the Depression. The 90s is when that happened, through the 2000s. But that would be just a miracle and a wonderful thing, a blessing. If we could get this to go as quickly as that does, or did, less than 10 years is not unreasonable. I think it's fair to say that 10 years is a goal, and I think we're going to push hard to see if we can get that achieved. But less than 10 years is not unreasonable.
Well, that would be fantastic if we can make that happen. And there already have been numerous donors and contributors to Hotel Polaris, but I'd be remiss if I didn't recognize you and your wife for the work that you've done there. Jerry and Pam Bruni, Alex and Kate Gilbert, Jack and Vianne Kachera, Hugh and Ann Williamson, the class of '94. There's many, many others that come to mind, but they've really, your donors and friends and Long Blue Line members have really stepped up to support this project.
Yeah, I agree. And, it's going to continue that way, because it is that kind of an iconic opportunity. I do want to reflect back on Steve Hicks and his company, because they are the ones that are turning that $10 to $12 million in net operating profit every year over to retiring bonds versus taking profitability out of the project. So that's just a tremendous thing. And I want to make sure that everybody understands that fairly clearly.
Dan, we've talked an awful lot about Polaris Hotel and the beauty of that hotel, how it's going to cater to grads and that kind of thing. But what we haven't really discussed is the building that's connected by a bridge right across the street, the Hosmer Visitor Center, which is just a striking building, whether you're driving up or down I-25, coming onto base, coming off to base. Can you talk a little bit about that building and where that design came from?
Thank you, Vince. I'm glad you asked the question because I think it's instructive and important for graduates and the community to understand the inception and how we got to that design. Blue and Silver, my company, was working very closely with our lead architect, Fentress Architects, and a gentleman named Mike Winters and Martin Ice. Those are the two lead architects. And we sat in my office where we were spitballing and trying to create this beautiful, iconic structure that would at someday be as iconic as our chapel, which is well known throughout the world. And so we said, well, we got to tie it back to the aerospace industry, the academy. And so most of the inspiration, if not all of it, comes from our academy. And here's what we came up with. I was looking for a Delta wing that was large enough to create a big space area underneath so that we could put a building together with a wing structure. Look through all the Delta wings in the industry, and there were some bigger ones, but this was the one that was representative of the F-117 Nightingale, which was the first fighter bomber, stealth fighter bomber, that was introduced by the Air Force. It's actually out of commission now, but it had the greatest aspect ratio. So the first inspiration was this fighter bomber that many people have probably flown in the Air Force as our roof structure. The second inspiration was the tailpipe, which whoever visits our visitor center is going to walk through to get into this amazing facility. I designed the atrium roof line to handle 30,000 pounds for the purpose of hanging an F-15 aircraft in there, full-sized F-15 aircraft. And so that atrium is designed both in size and in strength to handle the hanging of a static display of an F-15 or similar aircraft. And there's breakout walls to get that in there after the fact. The last inspiration, and probably the most important one, is, Martin Ice was looking at Thunderbirds and their formations. And we noted that we can't put the entire 35,000 square foot building under a single roof line. So what we did was we broke it out into 4 roofs representing the dually year all the way through the senior year. And then we looked at the Thunderbirds as they were peeling off to go to their formation abreast before they do their giant loop. If you stand in the parking lot of that visitor center and look through that tailpipe at the roof lines, that's the 4 jets peeling off to go into that formation in a Thunderbird air show. So those are the inspirations for that facility and things that I'm very proud of that represent our academy and our Air Force of now and well into the future.
Dan, what's next for Matrix and Dan Schnepf? You're going to take a little time to put your feet up, relax a little bit, and enjoy the fruits of your labor?
Vince, there'll be some of that. I really enjoy travel. I enjoy golf, but there's only so much of those kind of things that you can do. And so I'll be looking for the next challenge, and I'll be looking at other ways that I can help our Air Force Academy continue to become the iconic institution in our nation for leadership, for academics, and for athletics. Just so excited to be working with such a great team at the foundation, and it inspires me every day to figure out what is the next thing I can do. And I've got some ideas. I won't expose them today, but I'm working closely with our academy to see if we can't get some other things rolling to create value.
That sounds fantastic. And before I let you go, you mentioned a couple of times you're a kid from Long Island, back in New York. I think in our conversations, you still follow some of those New York sports teams fairly well. I thought you were a Mets fan. What can you do to fix the Mets?
I think the Mets are right there. If you look at how they did against the Dodgers, who won the World Series this year, they took 2 games from the Dodgers, whereas the Yankees were only able to get, or 2 games from the Dodgers, where the Yankees didn't do as well. And so I think that they're probably the second best team in baseball this year with a great squad. And I love their owner. Cohen is just doing tremendous things, bringing great talent to the squad. I think that they're going to be in a good place for years to come.
All right. Well, you and I have had the discussion, and I'm probably going to alienate some of our audience. But when I travel back to New York, I prefer Citi Field over Yankee Stadium. It's a much better building.
It is. It's a great one. Thanks, Vince, for asking.
All right, Dan. Hey, listen, we've taken up a lot of your time today. Thanks for joining us. I know you're on the road. To have you and what you've done for our Academy as our guest on this podcast today, hats off to you, sir, and thank you so much for all you've done.
Thank you, Vince.
All right, well, that's all we have for today. Thanks, Dan, for joining us. Before we wrap up, I also extend my sincere thanks to each of you for supporting the Academy, your Sabre Society membership, and generous support of the Air Force Academy Fund to find the future of the United States Air Force Academy. Thank you so much.